Welcome everybody to the December Cloud Cafe. My name is Jenny Smith and I'm the chair for the session on behalf of Stroud District Green Party. It's wonderful to see so many new faces and also a lot of our returning favourites, let's say. So the session tonight will be on creating resilient and sustainable local food supplies, something that I know is hot topic in Stroud and something that we have a lot of local experts on. I'm sure we could have filled this panel with about 15 people, not just the 4 that we've got. So some of the questions that we're going to be looking at and trying to answer tonight are what models are genuinely scalable and sustainable? How do we move to sustainable local production into the mainstream and make it accessible for those on lower incomes and also those with less time? What are the key barriers and how do we overcome them? And what would be realistic, even if less glamorous, to make existing mainstream production and supply chains better? So there's some of the big questions that we hope that our panelists are going to be broaching tonight and having a look at. So we've got 4 panelists. I'll do them in a running order. So first we've got Molly Scott Cato, who I'm sure most of you will know, but I will introduce anyway. She's a British Green Party politician, academic, environmental and community activist, and still a professor of economics. She served as an MEP for the Southwest of England from 2014 to 2020, and prior to that she was Professor of Strategy and Sustainability at the University of Roehampton. She speaks for the Green Party on finance and the European Union, and she was previously a member of the core group of Stroud Community Agriculture. Following that, we have got Greg Pilley, who is the Managing Director of Stroud Brewery, whose background is in ecology. He worked previously for the Soil Association on a project called Cultivating Communities. He's a founding member of Stroud Community Agriculture, a community cooperative which runs its own farm business, and was also a director of Stroud Commonwealth. Following that, we have Nick Weir, whose main focus at the moment is helping roll out the open food network across the UK. He's worked successfully with grassroots communities, locally, nationally, and with the government as well, also large-scale charities such as the National Trust. As a volunteer, he was a founding member of Stroud Community Agriculture, Stroud Co-Food Hub, and Stroud Home Education Network. And then last but not least, bringing a very local perspective is Ashley Dickenson, who was born and raised in Stroud, and Ashley's background is in farming. His father farmed in Slad and opened a farm shop in Stancombe, growing and selling the produce from land, including 8 acres of mixed vegetables, potatoes, 32 acres of corn. He's also an active beekeeper and now holds around 400 hives, producing between 6 to 10 tons of honey every year, which is absolutely fantastic. So that are our 4 speakers. Just to remind everybody, if you've got any questions, please use the chat function to put them in, and we will pose them to our presenters following their 10-minute presentations at the beginning. If anybody needs any help, then also you're more than welcome to contact Stroud District Green Party using the chat. So while we're doing the presentations, we usually ask everybody to turn their cameras off and stay on mute just to keep background noise to a minimum, as this session is being recorded and we would like people to be able to watch it after the fact. But we will get everyone to turn their cameras back on at the end. So no falling asleep, anybody, okay? Okay, so we should have our 4 speakers with their cameras on now. So Ashley, I can see, Greg, I can see, Nick, I can see. Hi, Nick, thanks for joining. Sorry about the link. And Molly as well. Okay, so Molly's going to kick us off. Thanks, Molly.
Thanks. So it's nice to see a few faces. I quite like people to keep their cameras on so you can feel you're not quite so isolated in these weird times. And I'd like to echo what you said about how many people in Stroud know so much about food, and most of them know a lot more than me. So I'm slightly embarrassed to be one of the speakers tonight, but I'm especially embarrassed to be competing with people like Ashley Dickinson, who's got a wonderful farm, and I visited that, and it's an absolutely amazing model for, I think, what we can do and should do. But I'm going to justify my speaking here on the basis that I was a member of the European Parliament's Agriculture Committee, and I worked a lot with farmers across the Southwest trying to think about different models, and I learned a lot from them, which I'm hoping to share. And also I am the Green Party speaker on the European Union, as you said, so I have to keep my eye on the horror that is Brexit, which I think is also really relevant to what we're going to be talking about tonight. But before I get to that horror, I'm going to start with the COVID horror. And I think part of the context for the discussion tonight is the question of whether COVID has changed things in terms of how people think about their food and where it comes from. Now, one of the things I thought was very nice in the early lockdown, when, let's face it, we were all pretty freaked out, was that how did people respond to that? Okay, they started off with toilet rolls, which I think we can all understand, but then we moved on through eggs and flour and all those things that said actually people are cooking, comforting themselves with cooking, and very often, I don't know about you, but certainly in my street, sharing that food with their neighbours. And I thought that was something incredibly powerful, and it wasn't just happening in Stroud, it was people finding comfort in food and sharing food in the middle of what is definitely the worst crisis any of us have experienced. But at the same time as we saw that, the fact that some people don't have enough food to eat also became starkly apparent. So we saw the massive kind of inequality of food distribution in this country, with more people going to food banks, many people just not having the money to buy food, and Marcus Rashford having to campaign for hungry children against a really heartless Conservative government. So I think, you know, those things were sort of in stark contrast and really brought home some of the problems we've got with our food supply and distribution system. But I think the fact that there was panic buying, and the fact, in fact, it wasn't so much panic buying, it was more that the just-in-time supply system means that if everybody thought, well, I might not be able to go shopping for a month, so I'm going to buy 2 bags of pasta rather than 1, or even, you know, an extra bag, like 1/3 more. Apparently it was just 30% more was bought, and that was enough to throw all sorts of supply chains into disarray. And that really exposes the vulnerability of the supermarket distribution model. And I think people have drawn conclusions from that, and they're ready now to think about different ways of distributing food, sharing food, and getting access to their food. So the kind of practical proposals that people are going to talk about later, I think, have a much more friendly environment now, and more willingness of people to listen to a different alternative to supermarket shopping. And of course, we have got the next calamity coming our way in just sort of 21 shopping days or something. We're going to leave the single market of the European Union. And it's been quite interesting. I was sort of wondering when the chaos was going to set in. And when I made these notes, which can only have been a few days ago, I wrote to myself, supply chain disruptions are inevitable, but only ginger has been noticed so far. I think that was a result of COVID, actually, rather than Brexit. But obviously tonight in the news, it's a lot of chat about things that aren't going to be available. And actually, I'm having my house here retrofitted at the moment. And Steve, who's obviously everybody knows the best builder in town, was not able to get various bits and pieces that he needed a few days ago as well. So supply chains are breaking down partly because of COVID, but obviously, as we know with Brexit, there's going to be disruption again. And that's likely to be particularly for fresh food. So again, this is going to remind people that if you're relying on a sort of supply chain network that stretches thousands of miles, that might not be the best way to depend on, you know, the sort of system to depend on for some of the most important things in your life. Now, I'm just going to read you some fairly scary quotes now from what's called the government's reasonable worst case scenario document for what might happen if there isn't a deal. Of course, we've got that excellent, skillful and well-informed negotiator, Boris Johnson, so no need to worry at all. Over there tonight, it'll all be sorted. But just in case something goes wrong, the sorts of things they're alerting us to are clashes over fisheries. You know, some of us might be old enough to remember the Cod Wars when we had this dispute with Iceland, but of course, the issue is that the fish that's caught in our waters, we don't eat. It gets exported to the continent, and the fish we eat tends to be imported. That is actually a crazy thing, but it's not something you can resolve by just saying to people, eat more mackerel. You know, people are in the habit of eating certain sorts of food, and it's certainly going to be disrupted if we don't see an arrangement over fisheries. They also note that there will be reduced food supply availability, especially of certain fresh products, and some of the critical dependencies for the food supply chain could be reduced. As they also note, low-income groups will be disproportionately affected by any price rises in food and fuel and knock-on food prices because of increasing fuel prices. And some food price rises are inevitable because of border checks that will take place. Vets or other people having to do those checks have to be paid. That gets put on the price of the food. And apparently only between 40 and 70% of trucks traveling to the EU, no, 40 to 70% of trucks traveling to the EU might not be ready for the new border controls. This could reduce the flow across that incredibly vulnerable route that loads, vast proportion of our food comes in through over by Dover, and levels with maximum queues of 7,000 trucks in Kent, and Kent, as we know, is turning from the Garden of England into the toilet of England within a few months. So anyway, I shouldn't really be flippant about it, but it's really infuriating for somebody like me who said all this stuff was coming back in 2016 and was constantly called a liar by people who are now running the country. Anyway, also just to reassure you, if the Green Party had been running the country, even if we had to go ahead with Brexit, even if we'd inherited Brexit, we would have kept inside the single market and customs union, and none of this disruption would have happened. So it's not been inevitable, it's the result of bad policy making. So that's one context. The other context, which is the crisis that we're going to have to face, and we should be facing already, but it's going to come roaring back once people have been vaccinated against COVID, is of course the climate emergency. And that also requires us to radically rethink the sort of food we eat and our diets and where our food comes from. I've, as I said, spent quite a lot of time on a project which we called Refarm, which was looking at how we could use the land of the West Country better in terms of giving people a more wholesome, healthier diet and also maximising the carbon absorption possibilities of the soil. It's actually incredibly difficult to persuade farmers to grow vegetables. So good for you, Ashley. But, farmers were much keener to say people should carry on eating meat and dairy because that's what they produced, rather than responding to the market demand, because people are changing their diets, and they're changing their diets away from carbon intensive meat and dairy and towards the plant-based diet, which, as you know, is the Green Party's recommendation. And if there was widespread adoption of the nationally recommended diet, which includes a lot more fresh fruit and vegetables, that would in itself cause food-related emissions to fall by 17%. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that soil has an amazing capacity to absorb carbon, but only if it's farmed organically or it's peat or something that actually stores carbon in the soil. So if you think about an organic sward, as farmers like to say, it's deep and dark and it's full of carbon, whereas a lot of farming today is just like right on the surface using chemicals. And so changing the way we farm, changing the way we manage land is like an important part of dealing with the climate emergency, drawing carbon dioxide back from the atmosphere. And it achieves multiple benefits in terms of soil health, in terms of biodiversity, water retention, as well as carbon capture. So I think one of the things we need to note is that the question of who owns land and who has a right to say what happens with land, that's got to become a question that's raised now, because we all need to benefit from those carbon capture properties of soil. Right, that was all the background, but I just want to say, I think Stroud is already modelling a better way, and I really look forward to hearing what others are going to say about that. But the kinds of principles I think we're working with here, and lots of people on this Zoom are already offering examples of the sort of thing we can do. But one thing I think we learned from COVID is that we need to leave space for nature to regenerate. We need to find ways to give ourselves wholesome and healthy diets without pushing nature out of the picture altogether. People valued nature more during lockdown, and I think we have to build on that and say, yes, we have to continue that respect for nature and allow nature to have that space. People are recognizing the importance of more local supply chains. I believe COVID has influenced that, and I think Brexit will as well. And also, I hope we're valuing our local place. This is something that is already very powerful in Stroud. I wrote the book, The Bioregional Economy, God, nearly 10 years ago now, actually. But it was based around what I'd learned from Stroud about food festivals and really connecting to your local place through food. That idea that the French have of terroir, I should say, you know, it's something they really do. I remember the Agen Prune Festival in the south of France, where, you know, every course was prune, from kind of like prune pate to prune liqueur, because the prune was what they had and they really loved it. And, you know, we're a bit like that with our apples, but, you know, it's something to celebrate and build on, I think. And lastly, moving beyond the sort of the consumption for sort of status-based consumption. I've got here avocados and exotic fish, but you can put your own thing in the gap there. But sort of like deciding what it is you want to eat and going to the supermarket and getting hold of that, rather than rather than valuing and appreciating what's locally in season. That's something I think we are changing in Stroud, and something where we'll hear more about this, but I already hope that we're leading by example. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not unmuted myself. Classic online event. Faux pas. Okay, just saying thank you, Molly, for that fantastic introduction to the session. I think it's going to be a really interesting one, and it'll be good to get that national perspective from you and then bring it local as well with the 3 other speakers that we've got. So, I mean, I think everything that you said is right. I think a lot of this was anticipated, but a lot of it hasn't also been thought through, as with a lot of government policy at the minute. Okay, so our next speaker is Greg Pilley, who is the Managing Director of Stroud Brewery, and he is going to give us his perspective on this. Thanks, Greg.
Okay, hi, good evening, everybody. Well, I think I want to start by really saying that actually we've seen a huge amount of change over the last 20 years. You know, 20 years ago, local food was very much a concept in many ways, and organizations like the Soil Association, Sustain, and others did lots of good work. And now, you know, that we see lots of really great examples of local food. So many more farm shops, farmers markets in many towns, some huge, very successful box schemes, including, you know, the likes of Riverford and Able and Cole doing some fantastic work. And so these are really huge enterprises, and certainly over the crisis in the last few months, we've seen them really stretched to their limits. They've sort of grown fourfold, and if not more, and sort of really illustrating how those schemes can work. Even supermarkets have greater powers to buy local food, and there's a question there whether that is truly sustainable. You know, when we talk about sustainability, that's really a question we should explore, and it includes maybe you know, who actually owns and profits and benefits, and where does the money go out of these systems. But supermarkets like Waitrose, the Co-op, Booths have some good local purchasing policy. And certainly for us as a brewery, you know, we've seen Mid-Counties Co-op really help us out over these last few months, sourcing local goods. So really this evening, it is my brewery as an example of a local food business. I set up in 2006 and was in the sort of early wave of small breweries. And the key message here, I mean, the reason that breweries have proliferated was because of a small policy change in 2002. Gordon Brown introduced a duty break for small breweries. Breweries producing less than 5,000 hectolitres a year, that's 50,000 litres of beer, qualify for 50% duty break. And what that meant is that small breweries or startup breweries could actually service the cost of capital of setting up a brewery. Before that, you know, breweries are quite marginal, and all the sort of extra was paid in duty. So that duty break enabled little breweries to flourish. When we started, even local pubs were not selling local beer. It was a new concept. We really had to work hard to start getting our beers into pubs. But interestingly, in 2008, that's when we had our sort of first of the last 2 recessions, pubs really started struggling. But they started struggling at a time where consumers, people were becoming more aware of local food. They were seeking out, you know, sort of a different experience. And even though pubs were struggling, the thing that really did well for them was local beers. They represented local business, and I think people were more sensitized to local economies in the recession. But they also saw sort of small-scale artisan beers as value for money. You know, it was a quality product, locally made. It had sort of local identity, and these are all things that people wanted to support and champion. So we saw a huge growth in little breweries. And to illustrate that, when I started in 2006, Gloucestershire had 6 breweries in the county. It now has 48 breweries in Gloucestershire. Nationally, between 2006 and now, we've gone from 700 breweries to about 2,500 breweries across the UK. So that's a huge growth. And I would have said that probably 2019 would probably been the best time ever to have been a drinker. There was so much choice and you know, so many different breweries, and all very local, and people very supportive of those breweries. Of course, 2020 has changed things quite significantly. The consequence of that is that the product, you know, the quality of product has gone up dramatically. You cannot make bad beer, so that's really great. But it's also quite marginal. You know, in that competition, there's huge downward pressure on price, and everybody's always competing on price. And I think we see that across the industry, that, you know, people, you know, the competition is based on money. And that certainly is a challenge. And I think when we're talking about sustainability, trying to move away from the discussion around money and looking at all the other benefits as well is one of our challenges. As a brewery, you know, I'm quite surprised, or maybe not, I'm not surprised, but we often see brewers treating their raw materials, barley and hops, as just that. They're raw materials, they're a commodity that they buy in. There's a real disconnect between them and the farmers that actually make those raw materials. They're just little factories that make beer. They don't really worry about the supply. There's generally always a supply of malted barley and hops, and the quality is managed by the intermediary, the maltsters. So the breweries don't really have to worry too much about it. However, again, I think breweries are increasingly more interested in the provenance of malt. And I would say that most UK breweries do use a UK grown barley. So that's quite good. You know, we're a barley producing country, and there's some, you know, some huge barley farms, especially East Anglia and Wiltshire. And our barley largely comes from the southern Cotswolds and going into Wiltshire. So I think in many ways we can cite that as a success. You know, the proliferation of all these breweries, and they're using barley and producing a plant-based product, beer. One of the things that, you know, we decided, the reason we can use local malt, we work with a maltings who buys that barley from the farms and guarantees that provenance. In 2018, we made the decision to go a bit further and to dedicate our brewery to organic production. So although we'd been producing organic beer in bottles since 2008, we only really decided to be wholly organic a few years ago. That decision was largely, or previously we weren't brewing entirely organically, because the industry really doesn't differentiate, and the price that you get for your product really is based on the strength of the beer, and therefore we weren't getting the premiums. We still continue not to get the premiums that we really need for that product. So we're working on reduced margins as a result of our ethos and our values, and that still goes on. It's quite a hard job to get the premiums that we need. Yes, and of course, you know, when we're talking about sustainable agriculture, you know, one thing is being local. We've done quite a good job of developing some of these local supply chains, but then what is it to be sustainable? And, you know, within the industry, there's a lot of innovation, and breweries tend to measure sustainability with what happens within the brewery. So you can save water, you can reduce energy costs, you can look at the supply of energy, whether it's a green energy or biomass. And there's, of course, a cost benefit to that by reducing those things. But I'd say very few breweries actually look at their raw materials and the cost of those things. And they're not often put into the calculation of you know, carbon consumption. That's usually done within the enterprise. And one of the things that we're trying to do is just to, within the industry, highlight the benefits of organic farming and organic barley, and actually the significance that that could have across the industry for biodiversity, and of course the health of our countryside and our waterways and our public health. So there's a hidden cost by not by conventional agriculture, and we don't get that, or the cost is sort of directly in our product, and we don't get the premium for that. There's a lot of greenwashing in the industry. Again, within our competitive industry, there's a few breweries doing a few good things, but they shout very loudly about it. And one of the things that we've taken on is an accreditation by B Corps, an American certification, which gives a measure of sort of a business's social and environmental performance. And again, I think as a measure of sustainability, the industry needs something to highlight the performance of different businesses. Of course, organic is about the production, but B Corp is a more holistic way of measuring those things. And I think one of the challenges is, how do we measure success? How do we measure improvement across both food and any industry as we move towards a more sort of climate-friendly future? So that's one of the barriers, one of the challenges. B Corp is certainly working for us, but it's little known amongst consumers. So there's a challenge to try and raise awareness amongst consumers about those things. So yes, I'm coming to the end here really. Just to summarize, you know, I think the brewery is an example of how a small policy change can have a really significant effect and enable growth. I think businesses need a way of sort of incentivizing the capital that's required to reduce energy use. You know, for a small business to put in a big investment in heat pumps or solar or something like that, the returns on investment are very lean. Why do it? It's not reflected in the price. The sort of things that could be used are things like business rates, actually having favorable rates for businesses that do comply and move along, and maybe more penalizing business rates for those businesses that choose not to, but some way of encouraging change. Yeah, that's it really. And just having a greater awareness of food and farming. I think we are all very disconnected, even let's say as the brewery industry, those people that are using raw materials are still very disconnected from the farms that produce their products. So I think there's still a lot of work to try and reconnect people with the realities of farming. And of course, it is a fantastic area to grow our green economy, getting people involved in growing food and processing it, and a very satisfying industry it is, and it's great to be working within it.
Fantastic, thanks so much, Greg. That was a whistle-stop tour of how it is to run a green business and the evolution of that for you. I think it was really interesting. I think you're right with loads of the things that you've said. I mean, greenwashing is a huge issue for so many industries, not just breweries, but across the board. I know that that's happening. I think it was during the first lockdown that there was something like a 200% increase in people Googling, how can I live more sustainably? And I think that, you know, there is obviously an appetite for that within the consumer world. So hopefully people can see the value. But I think that certifications like the one that you mentioned are really important, and how people can identify like what's really, you know, green and where that impact is really going to have. And support sort of the environment and social development. Okay, thank you so much for that, really appreciated. Okay, I'm going to move on to Nick. Hopefully you can unmute yourself, Nick, and you can start your 10 minutes now.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks everybody, really nice to be here in this company. I'm going to start with a story. About 15 years ago, when Greg and Jade and several others on this call had set up Stroud Community Agriculture, I left that group, and Jade and I had this idea of starting a food hub and building a cooperative of local food producers who could offer an online shop to sell to local shoppers. I want to share my screen with you because it's grown since then. It's become something quite a lot bigger. It's now something called the Open Food Network. This is what it looks like in the UK. The tractor symbols are, and the link is openfoodnetwork.org.uk. The tractor symbols are producers. There's several thousand of them across the UK. And then buried in there, you'll see lots of these little symbols, which are shops, which are bringing together the produce from those producers. Some of them will be producers selling direct from the farm, but some of them will be hubs like the one I'm about to describe in Stroud. I just want to say my bandwidth is a bit compromised. So if my audio gets bad, please tell me and I will turn off my video, and that should help. So this is the UK. The Open Food Network was designed in Australia and we only brought it to the UK about 5 years ago. It's now in 19 different countries around the world. And so this is just one little bit of the Open Food Network. And it's a global community of people, growers, farmers, community food enterprises, people who want to build a better food system. And the great thing is that they're doing it. And that's the really exciting bit. Let me just show you how it works in Stroud. So if I was to zoom in on Stroud, and this is a publicly available map, so you can do that. Anyone can have a look. You can see what Stroudco has become is a cooperative of 85 different local food producers selling through a single shop front. If we zoom in a little bit, see if we can find, here we go. This is the shop. This is Stroudco Food Hub. And if we were to, let's just move things around a little bit. If we were to click down at the bottom here, Stroudco is selling through other things. Oh, of course, please mention, of course, Brewery is one of our producers, one of our founding producers. Thank you, Greg. Ashley is one of our producers up at Lipiat. So many different local products. But if we click here, we can actually go to the shop. I need to say that the shop is open from Friday mornings through to Wednesday mornings. So I've managed to sort of find a back way into the shop. But if you do go to the shop later, and I hope you do go to the shop and place an order later, it will be closed until Friday morning. But I've found a little back way into the shop here. So this is what it looks like now. It's a cooperative of producers. You can see the list of producers here. And if you want more detail, you can click on any one of these producers and it will tell you a little bit more about them. And you can contact the producers and actually find a lot more detail. But if we actually go to the shop, you can then filter by the type of product. So you might be interested only in the meat products. You can also filter by things like whether it's certified organic. One of the reasons for certification is to build trust between the growers and the buyers, because in the supermarket system, those two stakeholders are a long way apart. And so the buyers need some reassurance of how these products are grown. What we're trying to do with the local food system is to build direct connections between the growers and the eaters, so that certification isn't necessary, because some of the very small scale producers find the process of certification very expensive, and we are trying to encourage small scale production. So many of the producers within Stroudco are as good as organic, but not certified. In fact, some of them are better than organic, but not certified. You can also search by gluten-free, you can search by plastic-free, vegan, all sorts of different filters. But once you've found the products you're interested in, not only can you click on the product and find out a bit more about how it's made and what its packaging is and so on. The big thing is that you can actually click on the producer, so you can go direct from the product to the producer, find out a bit about what they're doing and how they're doing it, follow them on social media, contact them, phone them up, build a connection with that producer. The other thing about transparency is the price. So Stroudco makes a 20% markup on most of its products, some products slightly less, some products slightly more. But the Open Food Network has one of its 9 values is transparency. And we want the shopper to know how much of that price that they are paying is going to go to the shopper and how much is going to be retained by the hub. If Tesco were to do that, you'd probably see something like 100% markup at least on a lot of the Tesco products. And Tesco don't tend to do that, surprisingly. So a lot about transparency. The other thing I need to mention about the Open Food Network is that it's open source, which means that this software is a commonwealth. We believe if we're going to build a different food system, we need to build it with tools that are different from the tools that we use to build the current system, which is broken and failing us, as Molly mentioned. So this software is open source. It's collectively owned by the people who are developing it, by the people who are using it around the world, the growers and the farmers and the community food enterprises, all collectively pooling their resources, pooling their funding, building one code base that's used globally and is collectively owned. I'm running out of time. I need to speed up. So that's Stroudco. I need to talk a little bit about the fact that we have James on the call, who is a Stroudco director. I'm no longer a director of Stroudco, but he is here to give more detail. I want to mention a bit about food poverty. So Stroudco has moved around the town several times. It's currently located in the Trinity Rooms opposite the maternity hospital. And it's part of something called Torch, Trinity Rooms Community Hub. So there are many different enterprises in the Trinity Rooms, of which Stroudco is one. And one of the key factors that we're looking at is food equality. We're trying not to use the word food poverty anymore. We're trying to look at food equality. So local food has often been seen as expensive. And that's partly because if you're selling at a farmer's market, you do have quite a lot of expenses. You need to stand there all day with your products. If you're selling perishable products, that can be wasted at the end of the day because it's not been sold. One of the benefits of online is that it saves the producers an awful lot of time. They can offer their products for sale. They receive a purchase order on a Wednesday morning with the total of everything that's been ordered that week. They harvest to order. The produce is delivered fresh to the Trinity Rooms. It's boxed up and it then goes out for home delivery immediately. So it's as fresh as it possibly can be. And there's minimum time on the part of the producers. Also, the producers are encouraged to pick up for each other, so they're not all driving into to Stroud, and they can add a distribution cost to the cost of the product. When I talk about food equality, one of the things you'll notice if I put in here. Freezer. It's not going to find anything. What's it called? Let's do long table. So you can search by producer as well. Oh, that's because I've got meat selection and it's not meat. So top tip is prepare your presentation before you start screening. Research long table. Rid of a meat filter. Then you can see Tom Long, of course, a little bit of a plug for Greg there. But what you're going to see here is Freezers of Love. So Freezers of Love are meals that are produced by the Long Table at Brimscombe, and you can pick up these meals on a donation basis. So what Freezers of Love are trying to do, Stroudco is only one of 14 different Freezers of Love across the district, where you can go and you can pick up a frozen meal. It's made from local produce, donated by local farmers, surplus produce. Quite often produce that's come from a farmer who maybe had a supermarket contract. The contract's cancelled at the last minute, which of course the supermarkets can do. It's not viable for the farmer to harvest that produce, and so they just plough it back in because it's not economic to harvest it. So instead of doing that, we are gathering that food together. We're cooking these meals. The meals are then being frozen, distributed to these 16 different freezers around the county. Quite often there's a microwave beside the freezer, so homeless people can go and pick up a meal and stick it in the microwave. Anybody can take a meal, anybody can make a donation, and there's no link between the donations and the meals. So it's a very accessible way to increase food equality. I wanted to talk very briefly about barriers. I'm sorry, I'm running slightly over time. One of the barriers to all of this stuff is, of course, that we're looking at a computer screen. And a lot of the growers that I know, a lot of the farmers that I know are very good at producing food, and they don't like sitting in front of a computer. So one of the things Stroudco does is it will set up the producer on the Open Food Network. It will add their products, put the product price in there, the product description, the photos and so on. And then once a week, phone up the producer, say, how much produce have you got available this week? We're encouraging really small scale production. We're encouraging people to sell stuff from their back gardens, people to make a few cakes. It can be really small scale, and there is a counter in here. So if somebody orders more than is available, so if I was to keep adding that to my basket, it would eventually hit a limit. Yes, there's only one available of that particular meal. It's limiting the stock. So trying to encourage really small scale production and encouraging producers to use this system, but with what we call a phone buddy, somebody who will actually do all this work for them on the phone. Similarly, for shoppers who don't have internet access, we have phone buddies who will take telephone orders, talk people through what's available this week, place the order for them, take a payment by credit card, and process the order without them having to have internet access. I could talk for quite a lot longer, as you can probably tell, but I am realizing that we are short for time. So please do ask questions and I'll come back to them later. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Nick. That was really interesting and great to see such a diverse range of things that you're involved in. I mean, the work that the Long Table is fantastic. I'm a councillor in Stonehouse, and I know that the community in Stonehouse has been really involved in that. I also work for the NHS, and I know that there's a lot of freezers out there in our NHS you know, hospitals and places like that that have been really, really valuable through COVID. I will definitely I'm sure there'll definitely be lots of questions as we move into the Q&A, but first we're going to hear from Ashley Dickinson, who's going to give us sort of the view from the front line, maybe, in farming. Okay, thanks so much, Ashley. Oh, 1 second. I think we're just going to unmute you. Oh, you're just still muted. If you could just press the same button again. Oh, there you go. That's it.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks,
So
Ashley.
apologies for not being very tech savvy, and my daughter's downstairs, so I can't shout for her.
No, don't worry. We all do it. I did it.
Well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ashley Dickinson, and we run the farm shop at Bisley, which is known as Stancombe Farm Shop. Stancombe being a small hamlet just outside the village of Bisley, for those who don't know where we are. We started, I farm in partnership with my brother. It used to be also with my father, but he died in March 2019, so there's just the two of us now. We started some 30 plus years ago from very, very small beginnings as a little shed, just selling one or two things that we either grew or produced ourselves. My brother followed the route of going into beekeeping, and I kind of tagged along, and this was due to the fact that my father had a few hives, and it went from being just a few hives to now we have sort of 350 plus hives, and we're producing, as you said earlier, 6 to 10 tons of honey a year, which we sell mainly locally, but at times if we have a surplus, we do sell to other beekeepers who supply places such as the National Trust and or other small shops in other counties. The farm shop itself, from what it was to what it is now, is quite a different thing, really. We employ about 9 people at the moment. They're nearly all part-time. They're all local people. It's very labour intensive, as you can imagine. We're not organic, so Leslie's probably going to shoot me down because she's been trying to get us to go completely for a long time. We do keep the amount of sprays we use and fertilizers to the minimum, so we're sort of trying to keep it a little bit ethical if we can. We do produce 1 or 2 things that are effectively organic, but we don't sell them as organic. So maybe for instance, I make hay on Roger's field, Roger Budgeon, who you probably all know. and his is certified organic hay, but I don't actually sell it as organic hay, but people buy it not knowing that it is necessarily, unless they particularly ask. As for things like climate change, it has its benefits as well as its probably fewer benefits than it does otherwise. I mean, if you get a long dry spell, it's quite convenient for instance, for making hay. But if you get a long dry spell, it's not very good for, because we can't irrigate, a lot of the plants that we grow would suffer quite considerably without having things like rain. Then you can get the other extremes where you get too much rain, and other plants and vegetables suffer by having too much water. Potatoes, if you get wet times, can create problems. I mean, we don't flood where we are, fortunately, because we're 800 feet up. But I have friends who grow potatoes down in the Vale, and if they are underwater for more than a few days, then they've effectively had it. So that's a downside to climate change. Who knows which way it's going to go? We've just got to confront it as it appears. Onto the COVID thing, something that nobody could predict happened to us all earlier on in the year. We didn't know how it was going to affect our business, whether it was going to be detrimental, whether it was going to be beneficial, whether any of us might catch COVID and end up having to close the business. We just didn't know what was going to happen, in common with anyone else that runs a business. As it happens, people seem to latch onto farm shops, and it's not just our farm shop. I've got several friends who have farm shops as well, and the same thing happened to them. It actually became a bit of a boom time, and we had no problem with labour, because I have a daughter at university and another one who just left university, and of course they couldn't do anything other than come home. So we had a lot of help, and we set up a delivery business aside to the business to try and help the older people who couldn't get out at all, because a lot of our customers tend to be the older generation. So we set up a bit of a delivery business, which we found took a lot of managing, and it was difficult to sustain. So we've stopped doing it now, because it was very labour intensive, very time consuming, and we literally couldn't really keep up at times. Another strange thing that happened was that people thought honey might be some sort of help with them and avoiding COVID, and honey sales have kind of shot through the roof. And so again, it takes a lot of time to bottle honey and get it all ready and distribute it and what have you, but we've sort of managed to keep up with it. Another thing that took off, not really unexpectedly, was we grow a lot of vegetable plants, brassicas, lettuces and salads and stuff, tomatoes, and the public decided to grow a lot of their own, and a lot of, and Leslie will probably tell you that a lot of people have taken on allotments, and now I believe there are people are queuing to get a place on an allotment, and that's true, I think, up and down the country. And so we do grow a lot of vegetable plants, not just for ourselves, but also to sell to people for them to grow. And so it kind of benefits us in that respect, if you like. When COVID first took off, it just went almost ballistic, really, and people were panicking, and they were sort of there were a lot of frayed tempers and things that were noticeable when people had to queue and wait to come into the shop, and we had to bring in sort of rules of our own, which we were sort of governed by policymakers to do. Put up plastic screens, only allowed 2 people in at a time, keep people 2 meters apart, all this sort of that we're taking for granted now, wearing face masks. And a lot of people resented it a little bit at first, because they had to, if for instance we had 15 customers there at a time and only 2 were allowed in the shop, then you have quite a long queue outside. So some people were waiting a long time and getting rather annoyed with having to wait for such a long time. But now it seems to have settled down. People, well, it's almost become the new norm, really, wearing face masks and standing 2 meters apart, etc. And so we find that people have gone away from the headless chicken thing, and they've become used to what's going on, and a lot more friendly. And I know 1 or 2 people have made friends in the queue, people who never met each other before, and so really what I'm saying is that the COVID thing has benefited our business no end. I think our turnover has probably gone up somewhere between sort of 30 and 40%. When COVID was on, it was a lot. We were doing a lot better than that, but it's sort of settled down now, and it's beneficial. And we've been reinvesting some of the profit that we made in various things. We fitted it recently solar panels that Roger put in for us, Roger Budgeon, who I'm sure you all know. I'm not sure whether he's here tonight or not. And we've just put a rainwater collection, or we're in the process of putting a 19,000 litre water tank up to collect rainwater, so we can use that for watering our vegetables and plants, and also the ones that we grow in the tunnels, and also for washing vegetables as well. We going back to what we actually grow on the farm, well, we grow as much as we possibly can within the limitations of sort of things like altitude, which means that it's difficult to grow certain things. Soil type, we find that soil type is beneficial for certain things. I mean, carrots, we've got about 3/4 acre to an acre of carrots, and I'd like to think that the flavour is difficult to beat off our soil type. Whereas we tried growing Maris Piper potatoes, and because of the high lime content of the soil, we found they were very scabby. And of course, people tend to buy things by looks. So if you look at a potato and it's covered in scab, it puts you off it, really. So we've honed varieties to overcome this problem, and one of the varieties we grow of potatoes at the moment is called Marfonas, and that is can produce quite a nice skin finish on it, which means it looks good, and it cooks quite well as well. So it's a question of seeing what grows well and sort of concentrating on that, if you like. We've sort of over the years worked out sort of a policy of things to grow on a regular basis now, things that we can grow, really. We still get problems. As I said, we do use sprays, but we still get, at the moment, we've got these little brown spots on our sprouts, which are a bit of a problem. And as I said, people buy with their eyes, and if you see a sprouts with spots on it, it does tend to put you off a bit. So, you know, it might be that we'll have to stop selling those and buying them in. We do have to buy quite a lot in at times, and we source as much as we can locally or from within the county, either through the wholesaler or dealing direct. For instance, we're not really a fruit growing area where we are. We have got some plum trees around the back, and we've got some things like damsons and what have you, but we're not really a fruit growing area. So we source our fruit from Castle Fruit Farm in just the other side of Newend, and they sell quite a big range of apples, and also they grow pears and in season things like plums and what have you. So that goes along quite well with the rest of the things that we sell. This time of year, with Christmas coming up, of course, direction changes somewhat. We did try growing Christmas trees, but we had a lot of problems with things like deer. Deer will come along and rub their antlers up and down the side of the Christmas trees, taking the entire side of the Christmas tree out. So we've stopped growing them now, and the 1 acre patch of Christmas trees, not deliberately, is our little wilding area, if you like. So instead of having Christmas trees in there, we've got a nice little habitat for other insects and animals. I mean, we do have badger set on the farm as well. Badgers is obviously quite a hot topic with some people, and when they were culling the badgers around us, we didn't let them cull ours. They did try to come and cull them, but we didn't really want. But they're something we can live with. We can live with the badgers. We can put an electric fence around the carrots to put them off. That's one of their favourite foods, I think, carrots and parsnips. So we got this badger set right in the middle of the farm, and we're quite happy to let them live and benefit from us at times, because they do pinch a few things, but we just tolerate them.
Well, don't get Molly talking about badgers, because I think that was one of her hot topics as well, badger culling. But hopefully it's very fantastic to hear that you haven't allowed that in your farm.
Well, no, sorry, yeah.
Is it all right if I move us on to questions, because we've got lots in the, in the chat.
Gone a bit too long. Yeah.
No, don't worry. It was fantastic to hear about what you've been doing at the shop and how you've responded to COVID. It was also fantastic it's interesting to think about how a lot of businesses who were very successful during COVID, how they managed to scale up. And I think the delivery service that you put up, even just for a little bit, will have helped so many people in the local community stay fed and well during a very difficult time. So I'm going to pop into the chat, and I think we had the first question that is a very interesting question, came from Sue Barans. Sue, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question. I think it will probably be from Molly, but Molly might need to call on Simon Pickering or someone, or maybe Martin. So Sue, if you come in and ask your question first, and we'll see who can answer it. Oh, okay.
Can you...
Yep, I can hear you.
Sorry, it's not Sue, it's John. Sue.
Oh, sorry, we're just unmuting you again. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you. Hi, John.
Right, I've just spent a few happy hours going through the strategy document and the master plan. And I did note that one of the great emissions in it seems to be food production and food in general. Now, there are great opportunities, I think, as we've seen tonight, for local food production and the local food distribution in Stroud. And I think the council do have some influence on that. So I would like to see a little bit more emphasis put on that in the strategy and master plan.
Fantastic, thanks. Molly, I don't know if you want to come back on that. I think it's about the Green Party's response to that strategy as well, and if we've made comments.
I'd be happy for anyone to comment on that.
Well, the Green Party obviously was
Okay,
involved in drawing that up through the councillors, and I'll pass on to them. But just to say, this is, you know, it's a really multi-layered issue. To me, it's more about how we use our land as well as how we get our food. So I'm sure that is covered in the plan, and local food is a part of that. But it's about what you eat. And somebody else has raised a question around whether meat is, you know, whether we shouldn't be eating meat. And as I said, if people ate more vegetables, then that would reduce CO2 impact. But on the other hand, there's quite a few complexities around that. So the calculations that are usually used are way out for various reasons. Plus the fact that if you have a good deep sward for grazing, then you're actually holding a lot of carbon in the soil. So I would just say there's a lot of levels on which this is working. And yeah, and like the food miles aspect is where a lot of people come into this discussion. And of course, that is still really important. And so we didn't mention, nobody talked about Stroud community agriculture during the presentations, but Nick and Jade and probably Greg as well were involved in setting that up. And so every week or every fortnight, actually, I get a bag of vegetables grown a mile down the road, you know, almost no food miles. So that's a really good model. But yeah, just to say it's more complex than that. It's more about like thinking of the land and the way we manage the land as part of the response to the climate and biodiversity emergencies, as well as thinking about local food. But I'm going to throw this over to Simon now, because he probably wrote that strategy, didn't he?
I think Simon is on. So Simon, if
Sure,
you want to
Simon
mute
was
yourself,
here.
and then we will invite the rest of our presenters to comment on this. It's just because it's a Stroud district specific. Simon Pickering and/or Martin, are you there, and would you like to comment on the strategy?
If Simon would be best, but if he's not there, I'm very happy to comment.
Okay, please do while Simon unmutes himself, and I'm sure he'll let us know when he's available.
Okay, I mean, firstly, I think what, you know, the strategy is out for consultation. We absolutely want as many different views as possible. So yes, John, please, you know, put that in. The Green Party is in process of drafting its response at the moment, so we're looking at that, and it will go in from the Green Party as well. So that's the first thing. I think the second issue is it's quite difficult to know. There's so many things on a climate change strategy for the district. There's so much that could go into it, and we've had to focus a bit on the things that we can influence, particularly as a district council. So sometimes we haven't necessarily got that right, but that's where some of the focus has been, those things we can actually change, and recognize that there's some other organizations or individuals have to change in other ways, and we don't have less influence on it. So so it is also a question of focus. But yes, put in the comments, and you know, there will be an opportunity to strengthen that in the final version.
Thanks, Martin. I think Simon's there now.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to do two calls at once. It's Green's in power for the AGC at the moment. But I think one of the things about the climate change strategy is to, if you look at it in detail, I mean, as Martin says, the council's only directly controls 1% of the emissions from the district, and that's something really important to understand. And I think one of the key questions is what would you do if you were the council and had such limited control? And also, what can you bring to the party? What finance can you bring? What businesses can you bring? How can you help and influence? Because the key message of the Carbon 2030 strategy is, how can the council act as an enabler? And an enabler is the key word. Yes, we've got some influence. Yes, we can do things. Yes, we will try and do things. And, you know, but the key is, how can you enable? And I think one of the things is the message of Carbon Zero 2030 is percolating through the council. And we've had debates where we've had, you know, Labour councillors talking about cycling, and I've never seen them on a bike. But and that's really important. But the important thing is how to make it happen and make becoming carbon zero the norm. Same time, if you want it more a stronger strategy, that's fine, and we'll look at ways that we can include that. But it's not saying you must do something. It's this is the way you can do it with your limited resources, and we'll help you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks,
Can I
Martin.
come back on that, or?
Yeah, sure. Go on, John. Give us let us know what you think.
I think Molly's tending to overcomplicate the situation. And Simon, I would say, look, tonight you've had lots of examples of what's going on in Stroud. Try and harness that and use what influence you have in the planning and land use in the district to take advantage.
Thanks, John.
I agree. We need those written down and put in the response, though. I don't have 48 hours in a day to compile all this. And though all the things that have been talked about this evening, if they're important, they need to go into the response so we can have paid officers to pull them together so they can go in. Because I mean, I don't, you know, not everybody knows about everything. And it's really important. Communication is really, really important. So do tell us.
Thanks. So I think the key messages there is that we will share the consultation link, and everybody, please tell us all of your fantastic ideas on how the strategy can be improved. I think, I mean, one of the things that was mentioned on another Cloud Cafe by a representative from the National Farming Union was about the Gloucestershire farmers trying to get the contract to supply food to schools in the area. And it's ideas like that that would be really valuable, because it supports the local farmers and it also reduces the mileage of the food that we're eating, and it also means that children get fantastic vegetables from a local area. Okay, I'm going to invite Nick or Ashley or Greg if you want to comment on anything that's just been talked about, or if you've, oh, Nick's unmuted himself first, so that's a hand up for me. Okay, Nick, off you go, thanks.
Yeah, take my hat off to Molly and Simon and Martin for all their work they do on our behalf. Thank you at all levels. I'm not a policy person, but I was involved with the group, a Landwise group, so maybe we'll be people on this call from Landwise. But what I'm just about to put up in the chat is a vision for, I think it was 20 years hence, of what food growing and food distribution might look like in 20 years time. And it was a very hopeful vision. We wanted something that would be very inspirational, and it is not based on any theory, it's based on hope. And I'm going to have to put it up in the link, but I again thank you to all of our councillors at all levels and all the work they do.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks for that. I don't know if you've got any other comments, anybody? Put my hand up if anybody would like to come back on that. If not, I think Molly briefly touched on the growing beef question, so I'm going to just see if there's any more. Okay, Leslie Green, would you like to come in with your question? If you could unmute yourself.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, Ashley remarked that mostly older people were using buying from his farm shop. So I just wondered what younger people were doing, where are they buying? But also, more importantly, Ashley's come from a family of growers. Are younger people being encouraged to go into farming?
Thanks, fantastic question. Ashley, if you want to unmute and come comment on that, maybe around young farmers, and I think I'm sure Molly will have things and people.
Yeah, so I started out after I left school by joining the young farmers, and although they're fairly strong nowadays, there isn't a huge amount of people that I feel are going into farming that so the younger generation would like to, a lot of them would like to, but it's partly affordability, because as we all know, land prices at the moment are ridiculous, which means that anyone who wants to start farming finds it very, very difficult. And the council, I've noticed recently, have been selling off council farms, which were a stepping stone for young farmers to get into farming. And I think that is detrimental to getting younger people onto that ladder and getting into the farming industry itself. But going back to what Molly said about not eating so much meat, I think that I have noticed that people are sort of swaying towards becoming vegetarians more than they were even 4 or 5 years ago. One of my daughters has become a vegetarian, not encouraged by me, but encouraged by her peers, really. And it seems to be, whether it's kind of an in thing at the moment or not with them, I don't know whether it'll fade away. I doubt it. So there is change afoot, and we, with our family farm, it doesn't look like there's any, even though my brother has 3 sons and a daughter, I have 2 daughters, it doesn't look like there's anyone going to be taking the farm on, and we're not getting any younger. I mean, I'm in my early 60s now, and I should probably die in harness, as they say, so carry on working for quite a long time yet. But it is a worry as to what's going to happen to our business and many other businesses around, and a lot of small farms, and ours is a very small farm really, are being swallowed up by larger farms, and so they disappear off the scene. But that's probably enough for me on that one.
I don't know if Greg or Nick wanted to, or Molly, you're unmuted. Would you like to comment on that?
No, not really. I'll just say what a fantastic farm it is, because, yeah, it was so refreshing to find somebody farming on that scale and growing vegetables, because that's actually surprisingly rare, and growing such a wide variety of vegetables as well and selling them very locally. To me, it was just a perfect solution. And as you said, Ashley, it's not the most promising piece of land, is it? It's quite stony and high up and so on, but I mean, the productivity is incredible. And then because you sell it through the shop, I suppose there's less wastage and better margins than you'd get if you were selling to a supermarket. So to me, it seems like a tremendous model, and I think it'd be a tragedy if somebody didn't carry it on. And really, we need to be seeing many, many more small vegetable growing farms like that one.
Thanks, Leslie. Fantastic question. I think that, I mean, I know Greg's got his hand up. Yes, Greg, tell us.
Well, just in response to Ashley, you know, that the issue of succession on farms and access to land has been around for a while. And yes, counties have been selling off county land for the last 15, 20 years, and that was a stepping stone. But there are other models as well. And I think, you know, access to land and securing land for farming in perpetuity is, again, a question we've been pondering. And Stroud has got some examples, like Oakbrook Farm is a community-owned farm that has been set up to remain as farmland in trust. And there's sort of policy work as well, this sort of uplift that farmland gets when it gets permission to be developed for housing, and where that money goes. So again, about working with local plans to try and maintain agricultural land as agricultural land, and if there's any sort of uplift or benefit that somehow that also gets passed down to communities in some way, or to just discourage the sort of breaking up of farms. So yeah, a bit of policy work to do there.
Absolutely, thanks, Greg. If any of the speakers ever want to come and do, just put your hand up. But I think, you know, like you said, with young people wanting to access farming, it is the access to land. So, you know, maybe farmers that have land might think about renting out small sections of it to small businesses so that they can get set up. I think it's Stroud Community Agriculture, is it? I know that you're all a part of that. That has the micro dairy farm and things like that, where they, you know, it's small businesses, it's small chunks of land, but it's not huge farms. But I'm sure that if farms have bits of land they're not using, that they could look to you know, engage with these kinds of new small businesses and offer them pieces of land to rent or something like that. Might be a good model. But yes, but I mean, I know that farmers markets across the country are becoming more popular and things as well. So hopefully that will carry on. Lucas, you've got your hand up. Yeah, you need to unmute yourself though, Lucas. Sorry, thanks.
I think we need to do a whole lot of different things. There's not one solution. It needs to be a whole compendium of solution. And for example, what Ashley has illustrated also is the multi-layering of a farm. You can do lots of different things on a farm. And for example, what we're doing now at Oakbrook Farm is, for example, having a whole chicken enterprise running over the grassland as well that follows the cows around. We also be doing agroforestry, and we're pioneering also something, or not pioneering, I think should say, certainly in the Stroud district, is doing zero dig. How can we actually grow vegetables, certainly, for example, on our stony soil without digging, and therefore by using an enormous amount of mulch, which is carbon sequestration, actually binding carbon in while we grow food. So I think that's all things we need to look at. And the Stroud Community Agriculture is looking for another site to do more vegetable growing for a second box scheme. Stroud Community Agriculture has got about 50 families waiting to join the box scheme, but we can't grow enough food to actually satisfy that.
Thanks, Lucas. I think you're right. Multi-prong approach is what we definitely need to think about these really complex issues. Okay, I mean, Jim Dewey, one of our councillors, is saying, should Stroud District Council buy a farm? Let's all have a comment on that, shall we? Fantastic idea. If anyone wants to come back on that, Jim, do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, thanks. I was listening to, you know, Simon and Martin, who I work with quite a lot. Bless them both, and you know, they give me lots and lots of help. Yeah, I've just read a book called Wilding, which was lent to me by Kathy, who's on the call, and it's a book which is quite inspirational to me. It's been quite inspirational about, and I think it chimes in with what Molly was saying about. It's not just about what we grow on the land and whatever. It's how we use the land, how we grow it, and you know, using that as an example, I think would be a brilliant idea. And I just had a thought that, well, we don't really know anything about agriculture and Stroud District Council. We don't. I'm trying to think where it would fit in any of our committees. We don't have any experience. We don't have any experience really about it. We have planning experience about, you know, where to build houses and communities and whatever. And we're obviously, you know, focusing a lot on retrofit and, you know, carbon neutral. But I suddenly thought, you know, it's probably the county, Gloucester County, that has experience. They have farms, you know, and I suddenly thought, well, I don't know whether it's possible. Could we buy a farm and set it up as a model farm and try and run it how we really want to run it, with the people, you know, feeding in that information from Stroud, and therefore we could speak from a point of view of understanding rather than as a theoretical. It's just a thought. I've got no idea whether that's possible, and I'll probably get a good kicking from Simon and Martin when they get me alone in our councillors meeting, but it was just a thought anyway. So
thanks, Jim. Great thought. I mean, and if anyone agrees with him, then, you know, respond to the consultation and tell Stroud District Council that's what you think. Okay, Lucas has got his hand up. So one more thing from Lucas, and then I'm going to invite all our speakers to do one final minute, because it's already, I know that Stroud can speak about this forever, but it's getting close to 9 o'clock. So, okay, Lucas, and then we'll go back to the presenters.
Would it be an idea to actually tie planning permission for housing developments to making 1 acre out of 4, or even a higher percentage, available for vegetable growing? So that if, say, you get the big development west of Stonehouse, which is X amount of acres, there should then also be 10 acres or something like that for vegetable growing, for small scale vegetable growing, and that the housing builder, the house builder, has to buy that. That's his community contribution.
Yeah, really interesting thought. I think that a lot of, I mean, I know Stroud District Council has a lot that talks about, you know, trying to be carbon neutral and things when developing houses, but that would be interesting. Okay, Jim, you've got 1 minute and then I'm going back to the presenters, okay?
Just to reply to what Lucas just said there, you know, we've got a recent example in Ewley, which is my ward, that when we built some affordable houses on an exception site in the village, part of that agreement was to have an allotment from the you know, the landowner who was selling the land for housing, you know, part of the deal. And I think probably Simon was pretty instrumental in getting that set up, knowing Simon or Martin and, you know, whoever. Yeah, so that's a really good idea, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And possible,
okay.
it's been done. Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our speakers for sort of 1 minute final thoughts, and then we will close the session. So let's start with Greg.
Well, I've enjoyed that. I think my conclusion is that food and sustainable food is multifaceted and complex, and it has a real power to bring people together over these complex issues. There is no quick fix, and I think actually in its own complexity, that is in the long term, its resilience also.
Thanks, Greg. Absolutely right. Okay, let's go to Ashley next.
Well, I too have enjoyed this evening, and it's not just food for eating, it's food for thought as well. And there's a lot of issues there that kind of want addressing, really. And one such one that came up from, I think it was Jim earlier on, was about what's happening to the when the council are selling their farms. I mean, what's happening to all the money and that they're getting from the development of those farms, and shouldn't some of that go into buying up more small farms for giving young farmers a chance?
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, Nick, we'll go to you next.
Thank you. So there's a lot of people on this call. We've talked a lot about what other people should be doing in order to fix our food systems. My offer back to you is that each of us individually has power. We decide where we spend our money, and that is incredibly powerful. We can buy our beer from Greg, we can buy our vegetables from Ashley, we can put ourselves on the waiting list for Stroud Community Agriculture. And let me go one final screen share. All of us can shop with Stroudco Food Hub, 85 different local food producers. The shop isn't currently open. It will open from this Friday through to next Wednesday. That's the last shopping day before Christmas. It's not working over Christmas or New Year, but it is taking orders from this Friday through to next Wednesday for delivery or collection on the 18th of December. Thank you for listening, and yes, buy local.
Thanks so much, Nick. And you're absolutely right. We all have the power in our wallets. Okay, Molly, final words.
Yeah, at the risk of overcomplicating things again, I will say I do think this is a multi-faceted and complicated issue, and big changes are coming because of Brexit, because we're changing the way we support farmers. And some of that's good because farmers are being encouraged to use the land in environmentally beneficial ways rather than just hold on to land to get subsidy payments. There's inevitably, I think, going to be a rise in food prices, and lots of people have said that food's been too cheap for too long, but obviously we do need to support the incomes of people who currently don't have enough food to eat. And we also need to make sure, as other people have said, that we control land prices. If we're going to have more expensive food prices, then we need to balance that with lower land prices so farmers can actually make a living. And most importantly, the big risk I see coming is that there'll be corporate land grabbing and corporate farmers pushing out the smaller farmers who can't cope in this new market. So I think we're a really good example of a place where people do support their local food producers. And there's examples here how we can do that. And I think, as Nick's just said, if we commit to doing that more, then we are building that resilience into our local food system and making sure not only do we have a secure food supply, but we also have really good quality food and a better connection to our local place as well.
Thanks, Molly. Absolutely right. Okay, so that's it. Some fantastic final words. 4 fantastic speakers and a whole load of people who've joined us this evening for a fantastic discussion. This is our final one of the year, so I would really just like to say thank you to Elizabeth Lee, to Lynn,
Can everybody
to
put
Dagan.
can we see everybody's face?
Yeah, everybody get your cameras
Happy
back
Christmas.
on and say hello. But just thank you to everybody who is working so hard behind the scenes to make these happen every time, to all the people who offer to speak and give their time to us, and you know, to these fantastic discussions. We're very privileged here in Stroud to have them, and we really just want to keep growing this community as we go into 2021, which will hopefully be a much better year for all of us across the board. But yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate everybody's time, and we look forward to seeing you in January for another fantastic session. Okay, keep looking out for the YouTube link, buy local, support local, drink beer, all of those wonderful things, and have a wonderful, fantastic Christmas and New Year. And thanks again for all your continued support. See you soon.
Happy Christmas.
Merry
Thank you,
Christmas,
Jane.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.